Hi, everyone. Welcome to our third summer webinar series. We're so excited. We have Gabe here from TikTok. Gabe is a friend of I'll Teach and has been on our podcast. Gabe is an RBT who is working on more progressive and child-centered forms of therapy. He has a tremendous presence on TikTok and is a really trusted resource to the community. And we're so happy that he's here. So hi, Gabe. Hi.
Hello.
Hi. So do you want to maybe just give like a little brief introduction on who you are, where people can find you, that kind of stuff?
Hi, my name is Gabriel. You can find me on TikTok at the_indomitable_black man. You can also find my Instagram under the giant Gabe, the_giant_Gabe. I like underscores. Um, that's pretty much all there is to me.
All right, awesome. So, Gabe, we're so happy that you're here. So, Gabe has agreed to come and talk about how to find a therapist. And he himself is a therapist, so he has really great insight into this. And so, he has I'm going to put the slides up. I'm going to disappear, so you'll just see Gabe and the slides. I'm going to manage the slides. So, Gabe, just tell me when you want me to change. And so I'll be here, but managing all that, and then I'll come back and we'll do a little Q&A. So folks that are listening, you can put your comments, questions in the comment box. Keep the chat active, which is great. If you're listening, folks that are on TikTok, people are listening in on TikTok. And so I'll try and field some of those questions too. Okay, so I'm going to share your presentation. Gabe, can you see it? You're good?
I see something. It says click to exit full screen. It's not like the actual presentation that I see.
Okay, let me see what I can do. Make sure that
Okay.
you can see it. You're good?
I can see that. Yes.
Okay, cool. I'm going to make it full screen so it doesn't have the outline on it. And just let me know when you want me to switch.
Okay. All right. So this is like my first webinar. Oh, I did the thing again. It's like, I guess when you go to full screen, it
Okay.
doesn't do what it's supposed to.
Okay, so let me see if there's a different way for me to play it. If not, we could just do it like this. I guess that's fine.
Okay. Yeah. Because I can still see everything.
Okay, cool.
All right. So first things first, I've been working in the field that I'm in now for about 4 or 5 years. I love what I do. And a lot of the stuff that I've done has been a culmination of years of working with kids. So I didn't just start working with kids in the current field I'm in now. I started working with kids when I was a kid. I've always been the person who everybody would drop their kids off to me, and I would be the ones who were responsible for them. Anytime there was a family gathering, I'm working with the kids. Anytime somebody needed their child babysat, I was the one that they called. I taught briefly for about a year. I had to learn classroom management. I had to learn a lot of stuff on the fly. And then outside of that, I had to learn just through my own independent study and research. And so when we're looking for a therapist for your child, we have to keep a few principles in mind. And so that's what we're going to be going over today. Now, this is just a broad overview. There are more nuances to this, but this is going to get you at least in the right direction for finding a therapist for your child that can be a good fit. So can we go to that first slide? It's okay. So first things first, it's okay, one, to get a therapist, and it's okay to shop around for one. You're not going to want to just get the first one that you see. You're not going to, it's like going to a department store and trying to find an outfit that fits you perfectly the first time. You're not going to come in and there's going to be this beautiful shaft of golden light highlighting this beautiful Armani dress or something like that. You're probably going to have to shop for it. It's probably not going to be in your same size, and that's okay. So first thing we want to recognize is not every therapist is for everyone. There are therapists who specialize in certain things. There are therapists who are good at certain things. And those things that they may be good at may not be a good fit for you. And that's okay. We have to keep a couple things in mind. We may want a specific gender or sex for our therapist. There is an issue, well, I don't want to say an issue, but there is the issue of relation. Can we relate to our therapist? Can our therapist understand us on a very basic step? And that would be something like gender or sex. I've been in cases where they specified that they wanted a male RBT to come in because that's what they felt their child needed. I've also been on cases where I was working with a kid and then they let me go because they wanted a lady RBT because the child was having an issue with relating to ladies. And perfectly fine, no hard feelings, nothing like that. I understood. And I was like, okay, great. That's what's best for that child. 100%, let's go with it. That's okay. Another thing is ethnicity. For people of color, especially children that are people of color, there can be a huge disconnect between working with a non-person of color and a person of color. There can be implicit biases that are there that we may not be aware of. And so they may want a person who is of their ethnicity or their culture, not as an exclusionary kind of thing, but as still a relational kind of thing. If I am Latino, a Latinx, and I'm working with another Latinx child, I'll be able to relate to that child and that culture and help that child navigate that culture better than if I were Black or if I was white. So we want to also keep that in mind, and it's okay to have those specifications when you're looking for a therapist for your child. Next thing, it's okay to ask questions. Asking questions is a good way of finding things out. I learned that on Sesame Street, and it holds true even now. I will ask a million clarifying questions to people when I'm working with them, and I want people to ask me questions when I'm working with their kid. It helps end a lot of miscommunication, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. Do background checks on the potential therapist. Do background checks. Find out from the board, find out from other people who have worked with them, find out something about your therapist. Who are they? Where do they come from? What do they do? Have they had any issues with the law or anything like that? Because you're letting this person in with your child. What do they bring to the table? Are they going to bring anything that could be a red flag? What are their credentials? What is their education? What is their experience? All of these things need to be talked about and thought about before you allow your child to work with them. And that's okay. These are good things to do. Interview them. Whenever I'm about to go on a case, I will meet with the parent and the child. And that's where a lot of stuff gets covered. You're going to vet me. You're going to see who I am. Like I was saying in the previous, do your background on the potential therapist. But this is where you can actually see them and you can actually talk with them. This is where you can actually see who they are, look into their soul, deep in their eyes, and be like, who are you really? And you can get all the information that you want out of that interview process. See if that's a good fit. See how your kid will pair with the therapist. We're also going to talk about that. And then finally, trust your gut. It's okay to trust your gut. Sometimes you may get that one feeling, I don't have a good feeling about that. That's okay. There are other therapists that you can choose from. You don't have to go with the first one. You don't have to go to the second one. You don't have to go to the 79th one. You can go with one that you fully trust that will have the best interest of your child at heart. Can we go to the next slide, please? Relationship and pairing. So this one is something that I cannot stress enough. Whenever I'm working with a kid, whenever I get my first case, my first instinct is we have to pair. We have to build rapport and relationship. When I got my first kid, God, that was that kid. He was the greatest little thing ever. It was my first case, did not know what to expect. My first opportunity being in the field. And this kid runs up. He was nonverbal. He runs up. He looks at me, stares at me. I'm 6'8". So he was like craning his neck up like I was a giant. And he ran off. He ran back. He like rubbed my jacket and then hugged my leg. And I was like, yo, I love this job. This is my job. I will take this job. So from there on, we had to build rapport. The first few sessions, we did not do any demands. We did not practice anything. We played. I got to learn who he was. I got to learn what he liked. And so that's what you want to look for. How well is your therapist playing with your kid? How well is your therapist bonding with your kid? Are they nonchalant and your kid is just off doing his own thing while the therapist is over here twiddling his thumbs? Or is the therapist actually engaging with your kid? Does your kid have a good response to how the therapist is engaging with him? Or is your kid having like an aversion to him? Is there a fear there? These are all things that you want to be looking at because that will dictate how they respond to this therapist in the future. And there's always a honeymoon phase, I guess I can say, where your kid will act a certain way because this is a new person and they want to, put a good foot forward. But then as that kind of fades, what are you left with? And so when you're looking at the pairing, one, it never stops. You're always going to be pairing with your kid. You're always going to be bonding and building rapport. But in the first few sessions, you really want to focus on that. And there needs to be a heavy emphasis on building that relationship, building that trust so your kid can receive instruction or correction from this therapist. Hopefully all that's making sense. Then you want to look at how are they pairing? What are their methods in doing it? Kind of like I was saying a little bit before, are they just twiddling their thumbs or are they actually engaging with their kid? Is it too much I know people that will roughhouse with their kids, which I don't recommend, but you'll see stuff like that. You'll see people who are not establishing a boundary. Those are also things that you want to look out for. We'll talk about that later. But is there a clear relationship building? We can move on to the next slide, if you please. Communication is vital because behavior is pretty much a form of communication. I believe 100%. Anytime you have an issue or an argument or any sort of discrepancy, it's because there is a lapse of communication and we're trying to bridge that gap. So your therapist should be knowing how to communicate, not just with the child, but with you as well. And when he's working with your child, there has to be that communication both in how your child receives information and how they express information. And your therapist should learn that. Not every child will explain things or understand things clearly. Not every child will understand things clearly. So it's up to us as the therapist to bridge that gap. Case in point, my first client, as I was saying, he was nonverbal. The first day I met him, when I was sitting down with this parent and my analyst, he grabs my hand and takes me over to the refrigerator and puts my hand on the freezer. He looked at me and I knew instinctively that he wanted me to open up the freezer to get him something. And that was his communication. I learned that from that first time on. As we continued to develop rapport, he wanted me to pick him up. And so what he would do is put his back to you and back up onto you. And then that was his way of saying he wanted to be tossed in the air. So I told him, do like this. It was basically just like, it's sign language for jump. And he did that. He got it after about like 3 attempts to where that was now another way he could communicate what he needed. And so I did it in a nonverbal way where he understood that doing this means jump. I had to see that lapse of communication and I had to bridge that gap for him because he could not bridge it for himself. And so a therapist should be very aware of that. A therapist should be constantly looking at ways they can bridge the gap of communication with the kid, whether that kid is having a meltdown, whether the kid is throwing something, whether the kid just isn't saying something. What is that child communicating, and how can I bridge that gap? When it comes down to communicating with you, the parent, there needs to be a communication in, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm seeing, this is how we're going to go forward. I've worked with many a parent who I'll be working with their kid according to whatever plan that they have. And I will say, this is what I've been doing. This is what the goals are. This is what we're trying to get to. This is how we need to do it. And I've had to offer, so there's continuity across the board, what we have to do. And a lot of times I'll have parents who are like, yeah, let's do it. But then there'll be cases where the parents don't understand and they won't do it. And that's where I had to bridge that gap in communication as well. Hey, I understand this is how you feel, but this is how we're going to get the behavior that we're trying to go for. This is how we're going to build the skills that we're going to have to go for. I had to communicate that. And that's very important, because if a therapist isn't communicating with you how to have that continuity, then that means that you could do something inadvertently that can cause a regression in the behavior or a regression in the skill, which can just ruin sessions, and that's wasting time. So we want to make sure that we have somebody who is able to communicate, who is able to articulate what you need, to articulate what the kid needs, and to bridge those gaps. And then, does your therapist understand what you're asking? There are cases where there could be something that a parent doesn't like, or a parent doesn't understand, or a parent is not too clear about. Can the therapist understand that? Can the therapist see your discomfort and then offer insight? Can they receive feedback? Can they receive any information? There can be cases where you know something about your child that I don't, and I don't want a therapist who is a know-it-all that completely disregards what I have to say. They need to be taking what you're saying into account so that they can tell that to whomever and come up with a holistic approach to helping your child. So that understanding, wisdom is the principal thing, but in all that getting, get understanding. We have to understand. Can we go to the next slide, please? This actually leads to, the communication leads to goals. Now, goals are very important. And I think a lot of people get kind of concerned with what kind of goals they should set for their child, because everybody wants their child to be successful. I think that's the ultimate goal for every parent, to have a successful, independent child to the best of their ability with a good quality of life. First, we have to think, what are our expectations? I don't have a problem with having high expectations for our kids, because when we have high expectations, that gives us something to shoot for. However, we need to be making sure that these goals are realistic. If the goal is to teach my child how to tie their shoes independently, that is a very good goal to have. But does our child have the physical capability in this moment to get there? Maybe not. Do they have gross motor control function? Do they have fine motor control function? We have to develop that before we get to tying the shoes. Kind of like math. You don't just start off in calculus. You have to go through arithmetic, geometry, algebra, and then you can get to calculus. So are they realistic for your child? Is the time frame in which you want this done realistic for your child? What are your child's capabilities? Where does your child shine? What are the weaknesses? Can we bolster those weaknesses? Can we strengthen those weaknesses? Can we use the strengths to fix some of the weaknesses? It's finding different things like that. What are their limits? Can we make accommodations and modifications for the child to get to the standard that we need them to get to? We can have those standards. Can we help them get there? Then we also need to be looking at, will my skill enhance their quality of life? A really big thing in a lot of communities, especially with communities of autism, is the suppression of certain stimming or certain traits. And the problem with that is you're it's not benefiting anything. What are you trying to stop them from stemming for? What are they going to get out of that? When instead you can focus on life skills like hygiene. Can you brush your teeth by yourself? Can you shower by yourself? Can you apply deodorant, lotion, things of that nature? Do you know how to put on your clothes? Do you know how to put on your shoes? Do you know how to do pick something in the community? Can you pay bills? Do you understand concepts of money? Those are skills that are required for daily living. And these are skills that we have to teach. There are things we have to be always thinking, is this going to enhance my child's quality of life? Or are these cosmetic skills that we're just trying to add that's not really beneficial? Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense because I can't hear y'all, but I'm just going to say that it makes sense to y'all. Social skills, skills of communication. Are we going to OT to learn how to speak, or well, I guess a speech pathologist? Are we going to a speech pathologist to learn how to speak? Are we going to OT to learn how to do OT things, occupational therapy stuff? Are we interacting with other people to understand how to use our social skills? Are we practicing that at home? These are skills that are needed to survive. And those are skills that we want to look at as opposed to just picking random things. Can we go to the last slide, please? I like to be like quick to the point, really quick. Things to look out for. In most companies, there will be a code of ethics. In most boards, there will be a code of ethics. And it's very good if you're having your kid in anything to go over those codes of ethics or to familiarize yourself with that. That way, you know what is appropriate and what isn't, because there will be times where people will try to push boundaries and go too far. Here's some things that you should look out for, though. In a therapist, you should look out to see if they're impatient. If a therapist is impatient, and I don't just mean in terms of time management, but in terms of being around kids, that's a red flag 100%. Because if they're impatient with the child, that means that if the child does something that's too irksome for them and they don't have the patience to deal with it, they can do something to injure your child, be it physical, mental, emotional, etc. We don't want that. Is there a suppression of stemming? Is there a suppression of the child's personality? Is there a suppression of who the child is? Now, I can understand the kid going around punching people in the face. We should probably not let that happen. However, if the child is just flapping their arms, or if their child is, I don't know, just touching something or just stimming out, why are we trying to stop that? As I said before, that's not helping anything. Let's not focus on that. But if you're seeing that, if you're seeing a huge emphasis on trying to get a neurodivergent person to become neurotypical, that is a problem. We should not be trying to support that therapist need help. Lack of supervision or accountability. We want to always be humble enough as a therapist to know that we don't know everything and that there's somebody who could know more. And so having supervision is great. When I was working in a center, I always had some sort of supervisor, always in arm's reach, because I did not know that I didn't know. And if there was a situation that I was unsure of, I could say, hey, excuse me, I have a question. Such and such and such, can you help me with that? Oh yeah, you do this, that, and the third. Thank you so much. That makes so much sense. And I was able to help the child more effectively. That's why we have supervisors. They are there for a reason. If they're not getting that, that's a problem. Either you need to reach out to whoever is above that person or contact the board themselves to get that rectified. And it may not even be your therapist's fault. It may not be necessarily the supervisor's fault. It could be the board's fault. But there still needs to be that accountability, and there needs to be something to rectify that issue. Lack of communication. To not communicate is to do yourself, to do your child, to do the therapist a huge disservice. There has to be a communication. And I understand that life can be difficult. Life can come with a lot of surprises. I have been in situations where something incredibly horrible happened, and I did not think in that moment to even contact the people I was working with. And so that happens. it happens. But if there's a consistent lapse of communication or a consistent lack of communication, that is definitely a red flag. That is something that you should not condone or tolerate. And you can find another therapist. There are millions to choose from. Maybe not millions, probably like hundreds, maybe thousands. You can find another one. Using punishment. As far as I know, I don't see why we're using punishments. I'm not allowed to use any kind of punishment. That's not my job. They should not be doing that. It's kind of self-explanatory. Like, I'm not going to punish somebody's child that isn't mine. Like, what? And then finally, lack of proper boundary. There are cases where families or the therapist will go too far. One instance, therapist was at a lady's house and he starts hitting on her in her house. And I was like, oh, that's a violation of our ethics. That happens. Red flag, get out of there. There are people who will try to make more pleasure talk than professional talk. There are times where people will focus more on talking and schmoozing than working with the kids. There are times where they're too comfortable with the kids. Physical touch, trying to sit on people's laps, all of these are things that you need to be looking out for. These are examples of improper boundaries. So if those are there, that's also something that needs to be dealt with. That's improper. So this is pretty much the end of my presentation. As a recap, it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to interview. It's okay for you to trust your gut and to think, I don't feel comfortable with this. It's okay to, you want to have communication. You got to have communication with your therapist and people who are around your therapist or over your therapist. It's good to have them build relationship and rapport with your child. It's good to establish goals that are beneficial to enhancing the quality of life. Those are really good. And it's good to understand the ethics surrounding the therapy that your child is receiving. And thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Gabe. That was so good and so thorough. And it made me think. I had so many thoughts while you were speaking about like my own experiences. And, when you started talking about boundaries, it made me think of a couple of times I've had experiences as like on the therapist end with parents, like trying to establish that professional boundary, because you are in people's homes and you become almost like a member of the family, right? And that line can get blurry really quickly. And I think that it's, I'm so glad you brought that up, because it is important to make sure, like I would have parents sometimes, like I was doing therapy for a family and she had, a lot of kids. And she would one day was like, the parent was like, how many of the kids can I leave with you when I go to the store? I was like, 0. 0 children you can leave with me. You have to be here actually. But that because you're there so much, you almost become like, where and it's really important as a sign of a really good therapist, that, keeps that professional boundary between the two. Okay. So we have some questions. Lisa says, do you have any thoughts on identifying if a child is relating and not people pleasing or masking? Great question. Or if this really is even an issue. Gabe, if you have thoughts, and then I have some thoughts too, and we can kind of kick off from there.
That's, for me, I haven't seen much of it, because when I'm working with a kid, I'm working with them one-on-one. So in a setting where they're talking with other kids, they're talking with other kids. I'm overseeing, but I'm not like in it. One of the main things that I definitely do see is when they're not able to, they kind of just go along with things, and it's things that they wouldn't normally want to do. And when that happens, you can kind of come in and say, hey, is this what you really want to do? It's trying to get a child to learn how to speak up for themselves. But then they also have to learn to navigate the social waters for themselves. But if you, Robin, could say something better, because I'm very surface level with that.
I have some thoughts. So, kind of traditional pairing, right? The idea of pairing in ABA, right, is that we're pairing reinforcement with ourselves, right? But the way Gabe explained it is the way that I teach it, and is kind of the more authentic way, is that you're forming a genuine relationship with someone, right? It's not just that you bring stickers or just that you bring your favorite things with you. It's that you have a genuine, warm relationship, right, between the child and the therapist. And that is something that, on the surface level, if a child is like people pleasing, you may get, like Gabe's saying, is kind of like compliance, right? Or I'll go along with what you're saying. But is your child laughing? Do they have fun? What do they say when the therapist is not there, right? So like, do they ask for them? Do they ask about them? Do they look forward to their sessions? Those kind of things are more genuine indicators of a good relationship, right? Are they smiling? Are they laughing? And is the child able to kind of like genuinely enjoy their sessions with this person? And I think that kind of gets away from the idea of like people pleasing or masking, because you're looking beyond just kind of like behaviors, right? And looking more at like the affect that is shared between two people. And that's kind of harder to fake. And I hope that answers your question. There's so many good questions. Danielle says, where can we look for info when doing a background check as a parent?
One of the best places you can start, there is a, what do you call it? Database. That's what it is. I can look up all of the RBTs in, I guess, North America, who are part of that, who have a certification. That would be the first place I can look. There are also companies that I know that you can sign up for where you can look for people. I cannot think of the name of it, but it's like a second, I think it's clearinghouse, level 2 background, that if you are working for a school, like especially a public school system or anywhere with kids, you can get access to that. I think it's for a fee, but you have to pass that in order to work with kids. That's a good place for you to start looking. I wish I had the website pulled up.
We can post it when we post the video on YouTube, we can post the research after the fact.
Yes.
So if you think of it. Daniel also had another question. Is it okay to interview multiple therapists from a center if we're not comfortable with the first, or should we move on to a different center?
I say yes. I mean, it's your child. You can do as you please. If you are not comfortable with a specific therapist working with your child, don't have them work with that child. You can specify that. And if they aren't willing to do that, then I would definitely say 100% go find another center. But I don't see why they wouldn't. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I don't see why they wouldn't honor that request. If you don't feel comfortable with that happening, you don't have to have that person do it.
I've had the same experience. So like my daughter has gotten, in the past, like ABA, but we're not really like a big strict ABA family, as people probably could guess. And so, the place that we go has more of a play-based kind of floor time approach, and a lot of their BCBAs are trained in floor time. But there was a time where, they were kind of short on therapists. They had some new hires, and they sent a couple of therapists that were like very strict, kind of strict ABA. And it wasn't a fit for us. Like, it just wasn't, what we were used to. And, I called the BCBA and the owner and was like, this isn't really fitting. So can you either like, retrain this person or kind of clue them into like that this isn't how, our case really works. Or, is there another therapist that has like the training that, we're kind of looking for, which is, more of a floor time kind of, play-based approach. And it was, fine. I've also been on cases where I've been the second or third therapist that has been on a case, right? It's totally fine. In my opinion, it's always good to if you're going to fire a therapist, don't just go right above their head, just say, I'm not sure it's quite working out. I'm going to talk to the BCBA. I think whatever, just kind of give them a heads up. But, thank them, say, we're just, so it may not be a good fit, but thank you so much. And that's, I don't think, I think all of us have been on both sides of it if you've worked, doing therapy of any sort. And to me, it's like, pretty common in my experience. Let's see, so many good questions. I'm in a position where I can't immediately replace my child's current therapist. How do I set boundaries?
That's a great question. First thing I say is, one, communicate what's happening. Hey, I feel uncomfortable in this area. I feel when you do X, Y, and Z, that to me, it's saying A, B, and C. I would like for us to continue to work together. However, if these things don't change, I will have to find other therapy options out there somewhere. It's being very upfront and frank. And when they try to push against that boundary, hold firm in what it is. You can talk to somebody above them. Don't ever feel like you can't. You can speak to somebody above them if they're continuing to push back after you've established the boundary. And if that doesn't work, then hold firm on your position. If you want to find another therapist, you're going to have to find something else out until that can happen. But if you have somebody continuing to push up against your boundaries, even though your child doesn't have a therapist, it also isn't beneficial for somebody to keep breaking an ethic boundary with you for the sake of just having another therapist. I, in my humble opinion, would say it would be better to go without until you can find something than to keep being in that situation. But other people have different opinions, and I would definitely say, don't take what I say as canon or biblical. Just ask the analyst above that person.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. And like to go above too. And you can also, two things you can call like a team meeting. So it's good to sometimes have, because especially if it's ABA or any kind of thing where you're getting one therapist and there's someone supervising them, right? Is sometimes you play telephone, right? So you call above them, but you don't know really what gets down to them or how that conversation went, or you don't know how pointed a communicator the supervisor is, right? Or how good they are at supervising. So sometimes calling a team meeting and being all in the same room. Also making sure that you're, if it's your IEP or whatever, there's whatever kind of therapy, there's some sort of goals, right? And oftentimes like the boundary pushing comes from the way the goals are written. So if you're doing in-home ABA, like what are the programs telling this person to do? Are they going rogue from the programs and that's the issue, or are the programs written badly? And kind of figuring that out, because you can always go back to the programs and kind of redo some of that language. And you should actually have, a lot of parents don't actually know what their kids' programs are, or they're not given a copy. So you should be able to know exactly what those programs are and like kind of troubleshoot from that. Danielle says, would looking into in-home therapy be helpful when siblings are often triggers?
I would say so. Wherever there is the behavior, you kind of want to look at what's happening in the environment and then try to work on amending the environment. And that necessarily doesn't mean like moving furniture, but like what's happening when they're being triggered. What's the antecedent in that area? Having it in the home in that case would be good, because that's where it's happening when they're around their sibling. So yeah, I would definitely say that is a viable option.
I would agree. I mean, it's hard to work on, stuff that happens at home. People can describe it to you the best that you can, but until you get like another set of eyes on it, right? You may not know. You may be thinking it's one antecedent, and someone who has a little bit, more training in the area may see 3 antecedents before that, right? So it's good to have, that second set of eyes for everyone. A second, a third, a fourth can be really helpful. Rachel says, I was told there was a massive shortage of speech therapists in New York City right now. How do I find a speech therapist outside of early intervention?
I don't know.
So Rachel, usually the way you find you can ask around your circles, and you can find like different agencies. A lot of the agencies that do EI also do private speech. It may be a shortage. maybe shortage in early intervention, but not a shortage in private speech because they're different like pay structures. Generally, private pays more. So there may actually not be a shortage in private speech. But calling around and trying to get on waiting lists for different practices that, and then just kind of like calling a lot and being annoying. Because sometimes, people drop down hours and a session might open up or something like that. So it may not be, the EI hiring is not the same as private, and generally private is a little bit more, if you're going that route, has a little bit more availability because EI doesn't pay as well. Real talk. So we're talking about ABA. Do you feel that people in the field are receptive to change the field from the inside? Or is it more valuable to seek training in other things like DIR floor time?
I'm hoping I understand this question correctly. So I'm going to read it to myself again. Do you feel like the people in the field are receptive to change in the field from the inside? I would say it depends on who you are talking to. For me, I'm trying to seek training in other things, so I'm not just stuck on one thing. Kids are very diverse. There are many different kids that respond to many different things. I don't think there's just one approach to everything. So I'm learning about other things that I can do to best accommodate a child. So it really just depends on the purpose. I've only met a handful of other RBTs in person, so I couldn't tell you 100% what they're thinking, but I would imagine that people, if they knew that there were different things that they could do, they would try to incorporate those different things.
And I'm seeing like a better, at the very, very tippy top, it seems like there's still a stronghold of a kind of old guard, Lovas, supporters. But it seems like there's a kind of, there's like these groups on Facebook of like progressive BCBAs, and there's folks like you and like other people I've had great conversations with that are really like pushing the envelope, from the inside and doing really like nice connected child-led therapy. So I think that the tide is hopefully changing a little bit, especially, I have a lot of BCBAs and RBTs that follow the Autich account. And we have some, really great productive conversations. Obviously, I'm in a lot of ways very critical of ABA, but in the same sense also understand that, it doesn't serve kids well to shut down that conversation. So I think that we just have to continue having these like conversations about it. And also there are, if you look at like early Denver model, which is like a kind of floor time ABA hybrid, there's also like pivotal response, which is kind of like pushing towards that like play-based, more connected relational. So there's like these kind of pockets, you just have to find them. And there's a lot of practices like the one my daughter went to that was, all of the BCBAs were also like high level DIR certified. So like you can find these places where you're going to get a more kind of well-rounded therapy that's not, so strict on, just the very strict kind of old ABA. Carolyn says, Mr. Gabriel, as an RBT, do you feel that your concerns and objections are taken into account by supervising BCBA? So Carolyn was said in the comments earlier that she was thinking about going into ABA, but had some kind of bad experiences and is kind of like trying to figure out her path a little.
That is a great question. It depends on who they are. I have had phenomenal experiences with a lot of BCBAs, and I have had not so great experiences with BCBAs. The most education and experience I got was working in a clinical setting with some amazing people. When I could reach outside the door, hey, I need help with such and such. What do I do in this situation? And they gave me immediate feedback that worked very well. They would take my hand and show me things to do. It was amazing. Anytime that I felt like something was not conducive or I felt some type of way about it, they were like, I understand, this is why we do such and such, but if you don't want to do such and such, we can try something else. I was like, yo, bet. I've also had some that were very distant that did not give me much feedback and kind of left me to my own devices. And I was like, oh, what do I do here? To the point where it got to the point where I had to reach out to other analysts on my other cases for advice on what to do in the situation because I couldn't reach mine. And so it really depends on who the analyst is. Just like you can find, or people can find a therapist, you can find another analyst that's going to work. I said that wrong. Just like parents can find another therapist, you can find another analyst and talk to people above them. Hey, my analyst is not getting back to me. My analyst is not providing me the feedback that I need. Is there anything that you can do to allow for communication, or can I have another analyst for another case? That's completely fine.
I've had I used to do floor time for the agency actually where my daughter went before she went there, which is how she ended up going there. But they, I would work sometimes on a team with a BCBA, and by the end of it, you kind of know who your people are, they know you know them. And by the end I was they would give me cases with, these two BCBAs on the team because they knew, how I work and we worked well together, and they understood we were coming from different kind of philosophical lenses. And I feel like that, if you can find that, that's, you want to have the feedback, and you also want to be aligned in terms of your beliefs and thoughts about children, because you don't want to be in a situation where you're being asked to do things that you're uncomfortable with. That's good feedback for the agency too, because if, some of their best therapists are I don't want to work with this BCBA, then they start to get a sense of who's really, doing a good job at doing their job. So Danielle says, is floor time based therapy beneficial for older children? My son just got official diagnosis yesterday. Congratulations. Welcome to the family. And we are starting to look at therapy options. I can answer that one. Gabe, do you?
I was going to ask you to.
I figured, I don't know if you're a floor time person. Floor time, yes, it is. It depends on what the goals are. So every therapy, no matter what, it's not unilaterally good for every kid, right? So it really depends on what your goals for your child are. But floor time is a great approach. It's just a matter of there's certain things that it's probably not the best therapy for. So if you're looking for a lot of help with a lot of more tangible skill building, like brushing teeth and stuff, that's not necessarily floor time strength. They're more on the social emotional, but it is definitely a great therapy for kids who have anger, anxiety, aggression issues, difficulty with relating to others. It's a great therapy in that sense. So it's really more of a matter of what your goals are. And that's true of any therapy. Not every therapy is great for every kid. I think we're good in case if there are any other questions. Really, really good convo and very active chat. We're so happy. Gabe, any closing thoughts, words of wisdom?
No.
Okay.
My website, y'all can go to my website, massevideo.com. I forgot to tell y'all that. MASSEVIDEO.com. I work with parents. You can schedule time to speak with me if you have issues with, I don't know, pick something. That's all I got.
Yes, and make sure you're following Gabe on TikTok and going to his lives. He's, always giving so much wisdom and good energy to the talk, and we appreciate you, Gabe. Anyway, we're going to end the live now. Thank you guys so much. Thank you all for coming. And just a reminder, next week, Casey Davis, Domestic Blisters, is going to be here. We're so excited. We love her. And we hope that you all can make it next week. And Gabe, again, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And also make sure to check out Gabe's episode of the Aw-Teach podcast, which is called the Autistic Tea Party. You can subscribe via our website, or you can find us on all the other, Apple, Spotify stuff. All right, y'all. It's been really fun, and thank you guys so much. I'm gonna end the stream now.